Okay, it is 7 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Nicole Watson. I am the director of the Catherine G. Murphy Gallery here at St. Catherine University. Welcome to tonight's virtual artist talk with Jaime Black, creator of the REDress project, which is currently installed outside on our campus. Over 100 dresses are suspended from trees, and in Jaime's words, the dresses signify the absence and evoke the presence of Indigenous women and girls who have gone missing or been murdered. Indigenous women and girls face higher rates of violence than any other cultural group in Canada and the United States. In their 2020 report to the Minnesota legislature, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force provides data about the issue here. Though American Indian women make up just 1% of the state's population, from 2010 to 2018, 8% of all murdered women and girls in Minnesota were American Indian. Between 2012 and 2020, in any given month, 27 to 54 American Indian women or girls were missing. The REDress project raises awareness, creates a space for solidarity and support, and challenges us to take action to bring justice to the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The REDress project and tonight's artist talk have been organized in collaboration with the O'Shaughnessy and is sponsored by the Integrated Learning Series at St. Kate's. Integrated learning is a multi-dimensional expression of an active liberal arts pedagogy. Located at the intersection of creative energy and critical reflection, the Integrated Learning Series is one way we partner the academics with activism, the paper with the performance, and the campus with the community. It is the array of courses, activities, speakers, events, performances, and exhibitions that coalesce into our ways of knowing. The REDress project marks the beginning of the next 2-year Integrated Learning Series theme, Indigenous Thought Leadership. So before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping items and some information about the format of tonight's event. Jaime and I will be in dialogue for about 30 to 40 minutes, and we have set aside about 15 to 20 minutes for audience questions. So please utilize the Q&A button on your screen, and we'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible. Finally, I want to mention that there will be a closing ceremony for the REDress project this Sunday, November 14th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It will be outside in front of the O'Shaughnessy and on the quad. All are welcome. This wouldn't be a St. Kate's event, of course, if we didn't take a little time to express some gratitude. Special thanks to Dean Tarsha Stanley, who connected our campus with Jaime and her work. Dean Stanley's leadership, support, and vision for the impact of the REDress project laid the foundation for all the integrated learning activities that will happen in the coming 2 years. I also want to thank the members of our Integrated Learning Series External Steering Committee, Justice Ann McKay, Angela Slaughter, Senator Mary Kunish, Judge Terry Yellowhammer, Jessica Ryan, and Sandra Whitehawk, who have generously guided our work over the past several months. Finally, from the many St. Kate's student volunteers who helped catalog and hang dresses, to our campus arborists at Save a Tree who assisted with the installation, and everyone who donated dresses, my deepest thanks to you. The REDress project has been a truly community effort, and I'm very glad to be doing all of this work with you. And last but not least, thanks to Jaime Black for being with us tonight. It's such a pleasure to have you here. This seems like a good time to introduce you and your work to our audience. Jaime is a multidisciplinary artist of mixed Anishinaabe and European descent who lives and works in Winnipeg, Canada. Her art practice engages in themes of memory, identity, place, and resistance, and is grounded in an understanding of the body and the land as sources of cultural and spiritual knowledge. Welcome, Jaime.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Should we get started speaking right now, or are we going to do?
Yeah, should we do the land acknowledgement? Should we talk about the land acknowledgement?
Yeah, and I don't mind having it even talk about that.
Yeah,
too.
maybe we can talk a little bit about that. So I can perhaps provide a little context for our audience. So I called you and said, we typically do land acknowledgements, but what I'm learning is that these are very complex things and mean different things to different people. And sometimes they feel like a checked box, especially when institutions give them. And sometimes they provide really important, valuable information for learning, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and I asked you a little bit about how you felt about that. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, it was really great having that conversation. I'm glad you kind of brought it up because it's sort of become ubiquitous that institutions are offering land acknowledgements, but I feel like an acknowledgement is not enough, and that action is necessary in order for things to really move forward and to really name that action and take ownership of that action. As we are acknowledging the land, we also have to acknowledge, the responsibility and the role that we're taking and going forward, and um, you know, amending and creating, new ways of being together. Um, that that really remedy the trauma and the kind of colonial histories that the land is carrying. So it's sort of a mouthful. I'm giving you a mouthful, but it's it's really about taking accountability and like where are all of us, what are we doing, like how are we taking action, how can we take action, even if that's a question you have as a non-Indigenous person, what maybe that's part of the land acknowledgement, like asking how do we move forward? What does that look like? And opening up that conversation with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And so it's not just about this is where we are, this is what happened before, it's over now, and we all now occupy the land, and it's no longer traditional territory of Indigenous people. It always will be. It is traditional territory of Indigenous people, and we need to acknowledge that, and we also need to talk about ways in which we can repair and reclaim these spaces as Indigenous people, and where do others stand in solidarity with those actions of reclaiming those spaces. And so all of that's important when talking about land. And then I also was talking to Nicole about the importance of situating ourselves on the land and acknowledging the land that we're on, especially as we're doing these virtual events, because often we're coming from so many different places, and it's really nice to just take a minute and think about where we are coming from. And I found that actually land acknowledgements made me think more deeply about where I come from, looked more into my family history, and kind of connected to the history of this place where I am, which is the Red River Valley, and it's the homeland of the Métis Nation, and my family is connected to that history, and so really digging more deeply into that, and giving acknowledging that history is actually really important to me. And I'm starting to think about it more because it became so popular to do land acknowledgements. And I think I sort of did that work in my own way without directly speaking about it, but it's just kind of made me sit back and realize, what the land that I am on is giving me and feeding me, and the stories that I'm walking, with every day, and the histories that we're connected to, and we're on certain pieces of land. And so that's really important too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, where this intersects so much with land and thinking about land acknowledgements and understanding the history of the land we're on is because, in particular, our exhibition is outside. I know that sometimes the REDress project is in indoor spaces, but there is something sort of unavoidable about with the dresses being outside, and we are interacting with them every day. Like there's not like sort of a one-off experience. It's kind of over and over again. do you want to talk a little bit about the origins of the REDress project and kind of how it started? I know you've been doing this work for a really long, like over a decade, right?
Yeah, quite a long time. I'm getting old now. Everybody. I began this project in somewhere around 2009, 2010. So it's been going for quite a long time now. And it really began with me wanting to use kind of my, my gifts as an artist and to share those gifts. And I was always kind of like connecting with grassroots groups doing different work in communities and around environment, around rights and justice and all of that stuff. So it was just really broadly, I was interested in those things as a young person. And, I never really knew what direction to take that, but I was inspired by like a couple of different events in my life. And one of them was I was able to travel to Bogota, Colombia, where a group of probably about 200 local women were involved in a street theater sort of / performance protest in the public square in Bogota, Colombia. So if you can imagine, like just grandmothers, mothers, all female identified, all gathering in this public square, and really speaking out and kind of doing actions to bring justice and speak out about the violence that was happening politically in their country. So people and their families were being disappeared. And I think the government was involved, and don't quote me because I'm not like, I don't know the exact history, but it's just, there was a lot of trauma and going on in the communities there. And they wanted to speak out about what was going on. And, they gathered in public space. They didn't ask, they didn't have to save up money to rent something. They didn't have to, whatever, they just could be heard in real time. And like some of the things that they did for that performance, which was about 6 hours long, were to just hold up signs that said justice, where are they? And at a certain point in that performance, about 35 women in red dresses showed up in the middle of the square, surrounded by everyone. And a drum song was started to be played by someone in the group. And these women did a choreographed dance in their red dresses right in the middle of the square. And at the end of the dance, they all broke apart and started shouting out as though they were looking for someone. So they were just like, they were screaming and running in chaos as though they were looking for their loved ones and shouting out the names of their loved ones that were missing. And then they all ran up and they, in a line of red dresses, went to the top of the statue in the middle of the square and helped this one woman in her red dress to the top of the statue. And she stood up there in the middle of the square in her red dress and shouted out, "Where are they?" And so it's just like, that's still, I've told that story for 10 years now, over and over and over again. But that was just such a pivotal moment. And of course, there are like so many different moments that kind of lead to an idea kind of forming. But that was really one of them for me. And I wanted to go home and bring that energy of that public art to our communities and to the struggles that we were facing here in Canada. And so that's sort of what led to the creation of this project. And what happened was I started working with the University of Winnipeg, and I worked with the Women and Gender Studies department there. And they were interested in creating a very large exhibition of red dresses. So they really supported me in sort of creating a framework around getting these dresses and getting the community mobilized about it, and the student body mobilized about it. And over the first year of doing this project, I got about 300 red dresses donated to the project from all across Canada and beyond. So I mean, it grew beyond anything I ever would have imagined, but it was just really about attempting to give voice to a story and a narrative that was being erased over and over and over. And that was, the colonial violence against Indigenous people and the colonial violence against Indigenous women specifically. people were struggling with this since the onset of colonization, but nobody was listening. The public had no idea what was going on. When there were media reports about people going missing, they were often just really poorly written and written from a racialized, viewpoint that really dehumanized women. So I knew that we needed to jump out of or work outside of these systems in whatever way that we could. And I felt like putting these dresses in public spaces was a fast way of saying, hey, this is what's going on, and just really raising the profile of what was really happening to women in our country.
What do you feel like the reaction was initially when you first started showing the work?
Well, I've actually been so lucky in doing this work is that like almost everyone I've encountered has given me such a positive reaction and given me so much support in doing and continuing to do this work, that it's just been absolutely amazing. People are extremely moved by the dresses. I really feel like they carry a spiritual energy in them, and they bring that energy wherever they are, and it wakes something up in people. It awakens a care and a compassion and hopefully a drive to become active in creating change.
Mm-hmm. What kind of community engagement and maybe like impact have you noticed when you have done these exhibitions? And I know that you've done a lot of them at universities like ours.
Yes. Yeah. And that sort of happened sort of by accident. It definitely wasn't something I planned. It just ended up being like a really good spot to be able to kind of broaden the education around the subject and have people have access to the work. So I, what just sort of happened is I just get invited. I've been invited for 10 years. So I'm not even choosing locations necessarily. They're choosing me. So, yeah. What was your question though?
Sure. I'll say it. I can ask the part of it again. I know I kind of asked you two questions.
Sorry. Good sidetrack.
But do you want to talk a little bit about like what kind of community engagement you've seen? Because I know one of the things we've talked about and that I've heard you express to even our students in other meetings is that your hope is that like there's some kind of a ripple effect, right? That happens with this work, and you encourage sort of continued creative and reflective responses. And I'm just wondering what that has looked like. Races.
Yeah, for sure. So I think about 5 years ago now, I actually made the decision to sort of open up the project to everyone. So I invited, like here in Canada, I made a call out on a certain day, and there are a couple of days sort of dedicated to ending violence against Indigenous women and girls here in Canada. And I made a call out on one of those particular days for people across the country to put up their own REDress installations in their own communities, for businesses to put up a REDress, in the front of their business, for people at their houses, in their yards, everywhere. And it's stunning what happened after I opened that up. It's just this work really grew. It grew beyond what I, of course, myself could even possibly dream of. And it's really a beautiful thing because I feel like in the culture we live in, we're kind of encouraged to take ownership. And I definitely feel responsibility to this work, but I don't like to feel like I own it, like it's mine, because I really feel like it's the work of all of us, and it's all of our responsibility. And so there's just something beautiful that happened of like sharing that work, that it was able to continue growing in a way that it couldn't have had I not shared it. Mm-hmm. And so, people have done so many amazing things, inspired by and related to and kind of making use of the symbol of the red dress. People are putting up red dresses across access roads to traditional territory to stop, stop industrial development in places that they do not, that they have not given consent to, log or mine. And there are red dresses in these spaces protecting these traditional territories. And so it's unbelievable how, these dresses, I think they started as, for me, it started as kind of a symbol only of violence and victimhood and, loss of power. But over the years, I've learned that these dresses also are carrying so much power and so much weight, and they're spiritually powerful, beings, and they've almost become like an army standing beside us, alongside us, as we fight for justice, and we continue to fight for justice in the absence. So it's like, it's just amazing to see that, and I think there's just so much strength in that.
Yeah, that I feel like that's kind of this is a good kind of connection to some. We were talking a little bit about, when we were preparing for today, talking a little bit about Indigenous matriarchy and ancestral roles, and we talked a lot about it talked about the relationship between power, colonization, and patriarchy. Do you want to share a little bit more about that? Because your work so obviously centers women and girls,
Yeah.
which means it kind of exists outside of these, very common structures, right, that we're living with today. And sort of
Absolutely.
for your work.
Yeah, and I feel like, actually, just a side note is, I feel like working with these dresses has really created like circles of community of mostly women, that that these dresses have sort of brought together, to gather around creating these safe spaces for women. And so it really has, the work itself has created like a whole new dynamic, really outside of what kind of the norm structures that we live in, by bringing together women, like-minded women, and usually women and female identified bodies, into space, and creating space for us and creating space for our voices. So that's been something really amazing about this work that I, again, never, would have, predicted would be, part of it. So, but I guess as far as like matriarchy goes, and I feel like through doing this work, I was able to, as I say, like connect to so many amazing Indigenous women all across the country, doing all different kinds of work. And so, I got to reconnect with elders. I didn't have an Indigenous female elder, present in my family. Like my mother, she's there, but I was kind of disconnected from my more extended family. So I really was able to almost make a family by doing this work, and just learn such valuable knowledge about our history on this land, and the fact that many Indigenous communities on Turtle Island were matriarchal. Before the onset of colonization. And I had no idea that matriarchy even existed. And, we long for something. We long for having a voice. We long for having, to be listened to in our communities, and to, be able to care and have a say in how things are done. And, through patriarchy and colonialism, we have lost that voice. And I think that, people often ask me, like, why are Indigenous women facing such high rates of violence? And my sort of simplistic explanation of it, which I think is really the seed of it and at the heart of it, is, if communities here were matriarchal communities where, care and connection and interconnection and respect for each other in the land were the main core values of the system, when settler colonialism came, those core values of that system are in direct opposition to Indigenous systems, to matriarchal systems. And so there was a clash there. And I think that clash is really at the root of the violence we're still experiencing today. So I mean, as far as matriarchy goes, I just feel like it's so empowering as a woman, as a female identified person, to reconnect to the history of when we were able to live in virtual balance with each other, with the land, when we weren't destroying things recklessly for hundreds of years, when we weren't destroying each other, I don't think at the rate that we are now. And so to reconnect to those systems is also a hope and a possibility for a future that doesn't look like what we're enduring and what we're sitting in right now.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm gonna go back a little bit, because you talk about matriarchy and the land so beautifully, actually, like the relationship between those two ideas. And I noticed that, the REDress project is just one of your art pieces. You actually do quite a bit of performance work. I know I think I've only ever seen images, but a lot of them include you kind of inserting yourself into the landscape and you're interacting with nature. I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about those performance pieces in particular and sort of how they relate to the REDress project. I think we have a few images of that.
Well, we can start here. This is, you can go back, maybe.
Go back one, this one, okay.
Yeah, that's good. So I guess, as I was doing this work, I was thinking about sort of like absence and presence, and what does it mean? Like, I feel like also through doing this work, I was accumulating and carrying just centuries of trauma. And we all, like, so many families and people are carrying that trauma. And I was thinking about the ways in which, how can we heal from that? And the trauma is ongoing. So that's it's really hard to heal from trauma when it continues to happen. But for myself personally, like, I was thinking about, like, where do I regain my power? Where do I regain my balance? Where do I get clear and reconnected to myself and to these knowledge systems? And for me, that was really about going onto the land. And so I was thinking about, like, instead of the absence of the body, it's like, what happens when the body is present? What happens when us as Indigenous women, because at the same time as there's absence, as you can see in this photo, there's all of us. There's all of us also gathering around these dresses to speak out about what's going on, to empower each other. And we are there and we're present. And so I guess I was kind of like moving towards thinking about our presence, our strength, and reconnecting to the land was one of the ways that I was able to, or am able to, continually kind of go back and make relationship and have a connection and feel kind of rebalanced because of that. We can switch through a couple to the more performance ones. And I think, like, this image is definitely like an example of that sort of switch and how I was thinking about things. And it was necessary for me to understand not only our trauma as Indigenous women, but also our strength and power. And this image is about reclaiming that space, embodying that space, and using the body in movement as an act of defiance against colonial imposition, and really thinking about dance and movement as a way of breaking through and breaking free from those systemic sort of oppressions that we deal with day to day.
Yeah, I recall in one of our first meetings, we talked about like it is the REDress project is so important in that it does raise awareness, but we don't want to limit our definition of Indigenous women and girls to that tragedy or to that violence, that there's a
Yes.
lot of power and strength to be communicated. And I feel like when I look at the images of your performance work, like that comes through so strongly.
Yeah, and I think there's that, I think over the years of doing this work too, I was sort of noticing how it was so easy for sort of the public to understand us as Indigenous women as victims.
Mhm.
It almost was comfortable, and that was really a problem. And I also felt like through speaking out about this trauma to often groups of Indigenous women,
Mm.
that we would all leave feeling disempowered and feeling like we had no voice and feeling like all there was to us was trauma. And I felt like that was really a disservice. And I didn't want this work to kind of carry on um, contributing to the disempowering feelings that we already carry. Um, so it just really was, it was time to, switch the narrative
Mhm.
and recognize our presence and
Mhm.
our voices.
I'm wondering, I feel like I read um, at some point too that like, how do you feel when you do this performance work? Because I feel like I read somewhere that in some ways this was sort of an outlet or a release from the intensity and the traumatic nature of constantly, doing Red Dress Project and hearing the stories of
Mhm.
families affected by the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, like, I mean, that transition from, um, only focusing on trauma and victimhood, that transition was made as almost like I needed to do that for not just for my audiences and the people I was bringing together, but also for myself, as
Mhm.
a way of, uh, working through those feelings and those traumas. And I mean, I still do that. And I feel like my art is really a vehicle for being able to express like and feel through, like just physically feel through and release some of that trauma. And I think that the body holds, the body holds those memories and that trauma. And but the body also, like, I feel like people talk a lot about us carrying intergenerational trauma, but there's also a saying that we also carry intergenerational wisdom, and we have thousands of years in our blood of living in balance and and virtual harmony with everything around us. And so I think once, if we can get through certain things, we that's what we find on the other side.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm continually doing. And it's as I say, because trauma is reoccurring often, it's a cycle that needs to be repeated. It's not, you're never really done, you're never really done going through the hard things, but often on the other side of them, there's just something really powerful that you can find and connect to and tap into.
Mhm. Do you want to talk a little bit about this image that we're looking at on the screen? It's
Yeah.
so beautiful.
Oh, I just feel like it's so harrowing when I look at it. It's it's a hard one. Yeah. So this series of photos is of a performance that I did in Banff, and I actually had a dream that I was doing this, and I think it took me about a year to actually recreate it. But it was, yeah, I had a dream that I had like those sticks over my face, and so I thought, I should probably make that happen. So I went out there and I did that. But I also feel like I'm sort of like intuitively guided to create these images and make this work. But this work is also always my catharsis and also my teacher. So I feel like over the years, like many of the works that I've created teach me something different year by year, like depending on where I'm at and what, what I'm open to or not open to at the time, they will teach me new lessons. So I feel like, this image was, I think I said it titled, They Tried to Bury Us. And I was definitely going through in my life at that time, like just really difficult things. And I felt that feeling of like, being silenced and just being discarded and, just wanting to get rid of, and just like thinking about like, all the women who are and have felt that way, and as though they're always trying to bury us. Like I was thinking about also like in Europe, like how earth-based religions were outlawed and people were tortured for having connection to the land. Like women were killed for having that connection to the land. And the same thing's happening here on our land to Indigenous women, right? So that knowledge and that connection to the land is apparently like dangerous, and people are targeting women who carry that knowledge. And that's like one side of it. But then I also, as the rest of the saying of they tried to bury us is they tried to bury us, but they didn't know that we were seeds. And so in this performance, what I'm kind of doing is really thinking about what it feels like to like come up out of the dark, to like follow the light, to, to somewhere new, to put out new roots, to actually be, go through that cycle of dying and being reborn again, and bringing that knowledge back. And so I'm being a seed.
Should I go to the next one? I can't remember what it is. Oh yeah. Want to say a little bit about this one as well?
Sure. Yeah. So again, like I'm really going back to the land to release, what I'm carrying in myself, to reconnect to the knowledge and the history that I think is alive in the land at all times, right? And that this rock was around for all the time that matriarchy was alive and well on this land, right? Like the matriarchs probably walked this rock. So I really feel like, the rock and the water have memory of what it was like before things became how they are right now. And when I'm feeling hopeful, I always tell people like that, on the timeline of humanity, colonization and settler colonialism and patriarchy are actually like this tiny little blip on a massive timeline of human beings, animals, and the land coexisting in virtual balance for thousands and thousands of years. So we all carry that memory of how to do that. And it's like, I feel like going back to the land over and over again and creating this relationship and this intimacy and this connection just sparks that in us and reminds us that the systems that we live in are actually fabricated, and they're not, they do affect our lives every day, but there's a way out, and there's other ways of walking, and there's other ways of being. And I feel like the land teaches us and shows us that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I'm seeing we're having quite a few questions come in.
So many questions.
Which is wonderful. And I think maybe I'll just start reading a few of them, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. Nice.
So they're kind of arranged depending on, based on what we've been talking about. And so the first one was combining the words red and dress into REDress meant to be a reference to the word, I think, redress is what the person is asking.
Yes, yes, it was. um, I'm also kind of a writer, which I'm getting more into again right now, and so I do love playing with words, and it just sort of fit and is like a perfect way of expressing what the dresses are trying to do.
Yeah, I love that sort of play on that word, or kind of readdressing, or to me,
Yeah.
it was kind of connected to like thinking about other ways of being, right? Which is what we're
Yes.
just talking about with this last image. Um, and another question is, uh, this is such a beautiful exhibit. The writer says, do you continue to add red dresses to the project? And if so, how can we donate dresses to the project?
Well, as I said, I started out with so many dresses, and I kind of stopped taking donations for a chunk of time. However, I believe Nicole has gotten a lot of donations of dresses from the area you guys are in and the dresses are in right now, which is so amazing. And, perhaps she'd be willing to take donations if you have.
Yeah, I can mention that. So we did do a collection event. Jaime sent us some dresses because they travel between institutions. So Jaime sent us dresses, and then our external steering committee really supported us by collecting dresses from tribal communities in Minnesota. And then St. Kate's community members had donated dresses. So that's why we had so many to install. And I do get requests from folks who would like to donate to the project. We can accept donations here in the Visual Arts Building, and I can, if they come before the end of the installation, we'll even put them up as part of the installation. We just keep adding to it. And I'm happy to send them along to Jaime at some point, because we are having, Jaime will be in a gallery exhibition here in the gallery in February of 2023. And we will be doing another iteration of the Red Dress project, but it might look a little different, probably will. But at some point we will be sending Jaime red dresses to contribute to the project. So we can take those. Let's see, another question, Jaime. Who are some of the artists in the broad sense of the word that you admire, who have informed your work in direct and indirect ways? And what about, what specifically about their work inspires you?
Yeah, I mean, oh goodness, I have so many artists that I love. But the first person that comes to mind is Rebecca Belmore. She's a performance artist and visual artist and I didn't realize this about her, but we're actually from around the same place, around the Thunder Bay area. So, I guess cool artists come from there. But she does such powerful, unflinching work, and just very political and very raw, and I was just I am very inspired by her work. She does a lot of performance work. Another artist I really like is Regina Jose Galindo. She's I actually don't remember where she's from. Terrible at remembering details about things, but that is her name for sure. But she's done also a lot of political work. There are images of her standing naked as a bulldozer digs up the land all the way around her body, except for the land that she's standing on. So she just does very poignant work that speaks to sort of violence against the land and against the body, and also like political violence, and just really calls that out through the work that she does. And so I'm inspired by that. And I mean, there's just so many amazing artists. Those are two that come to mind.
Thank you. Another attendee asks, can you talk a little bit more about the color red? It seems like a clear connection to the lost blood of MMIW. Is there a deeper meaning of the color red in Métis or Indigenous traditions and meaning?
Yeah, there definitely is. I'll just see that I actually didn't grow up with any traditional teachings. However, I don't know. I guess I kind of had my own little spiritual practice that I would do kind of out by myself in the bush and places sometimes. And I would always use red for that. Like I would always use red thread or um, red ribbon or red ties. And it was really interesting as I got kind of learning more about Indigenous spirituality is that that's very common for red to be used in ceremony. And I won't say specifically what, the meaning in terms of like the Anishinaabe or Cree view of that color is, but I will say that like for myself personally, um, it's really the color like of our lifeblood. And you're right about that. It is. It's our bloodline. It's what animates us. It's what connects us. Um, and as well, through the course of doing this work, um, I have learned a lot of different ways that people kind of understand and read the color. And so it very much is open, and I don't feel like it needs to mean one specific thing. Um, and so a Dakota woman that I know who's also an artist from this area, she told me red is the only color that the spirits can see. And that's something I didn't know in my mind, but it makes sense that that color was chosen. And I think sometimes things just come and you don't really know why they came that way until until you learn, right? And so it's really, really interesting to and also like cultures all across the world use red in ceremony. And I'm sure although there's differing meanings and symbols to that color, there's probably similarities as well. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. We haven't really talked much about the color red, so I really appreciate that question. Another person asked specifically about the image that's on the screen right now. For this image of the woman on the rock, was this inspired by your walk with I think it's the Nibi walk? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. The Indigenous led ceremony along the river. This is such a moving image.
Oh yeah. You know what? Actually, I can't remember. Well, okay, first of all, I'll just say that I'm very interested and follow the water walks, and a lot of people I'm connected to on social media are part of and doing water walks in different places around the country. And um, I am really interested in being on a full-time water walk at some point. I have a young one, so it's very difficult for me to be off and gone for weeks at a time. But it's something I would just absolutely love to do. And I just have so much respect for, the women who carry the water and who do the ceremonial work to draw attention to water. And I'm so inspired by them. And yeah, so I don't know that these things live in me, right? These thoughts and these connections. And so I'm sure that that was part of the reason why I was doing this work. And I also went to the water because I felt like I needed healing and I needed to release things. And I feel like when I enter that world of being in the water, it can carry the weight that I normally carry away from me and make me light again. And there's just something so healing and powerful about that. And it's old as time, right? Like we come from the water in our mother's bodies. So we are the water and we come from the water. And so going back to the water has just really always been really healing for me and very important to me.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, someone is wondering if you can repeat the names of the artists that you're inspired by. I suspect they were writing down the names.
Yes. So Rebecca Belmore, Belmore, and Regina Jose, so that's Jose with an accent. Galindo, Galindo. Yeah.
Thank you, Jaime.
Yeah, for sure.
Another question. What were your thoughts going into this project and perhaps other projects about this potentially being an example of art as activism, or just your thoughts in general on projects surrounding MMIW becoming tools to make change?
Well, I'm so excited about, art being a vehicle for creating change, because I think that, art comes from a place, um, it just comes from us, and it's a way to kind of speak out in the here and now, and it's very immediate, and it's very raw, and it's very real, and it's connected to the grassroots and to our own experiences. And I think, I just think like the more that we can do through those channels, the further we will get.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that that's something that at least in particular, our art students, we talk a lot about art as activism here.
Mhm.
I'm gonna interject with a question I have, and I know kind of one of the themes you and I have talked about is healing, and which I think is an important part of the work that you do with the Red Dress Project. And I know you've kind of mentioned it a little bit too in your performance work, but what does healing look like to you, and how do you express it in your work, do you think?
I just feel like I'm going to say, this image is healing for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about other things as well. I mean, there's like an absence and a presence there, and like maybe a spiritual element to this work too. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's healing. Like for me personally, healing is really, I don't know. Like for me, my art practice is really healing. Creating is really healing. Making space to kind of sit with the things that are difficult, and thinking about ways in which I can release those things. I've been going to ceremony for quite a few years now. Not all the time, but that's a really helpful way of connecting with other people and releasing energy in ourselves. That's, because if we don't let go of those feelings, they sit in us. They just keep sitting in us, and it's it's really tricky, like I said, because I know, I feel like I live with a lot of privilege. I live in a safe space, in a safe home, in a safe neighborhood, and not everybody has that, and people are living with day-to-day fear every day. And so healing is actually really complicated when you can't even have a safe place to live. And I understand that, and I see that. So I guess this is just from my own kind of personal experience and what I am, privileged enough to even visit these spaces, because not everybody can even do that, right? So, healing looks different for all of us. And I think that we need to continue to like allow space for, or kind of like fight for safe spaces for people to even exist before healing can even happen, right? Because trauma is ongoing. When you can't even walk to the store without being really scared, there is no healing there. You can't. And to put that on people and not on the systems that create that injustice is not fair. So yeah, so we need to do what we can to heal ourselves, but also continue to fight to create safe spaces where people don't have to constantly be healing from trauma.
Thanks for saying that. Another question. You said so this is the person asking a question says, you said you're a writer, so I suspect that you're also then a reader. Are there any novels that you strongly identify with and/or that inspire your work?
Yeah, actually. So, oh my goodness. Oh, I'm so awful at remembering names of you guys. So there's a Métis writer from, I believe, Alberta named Maria Campbell. She wrote a book called The Half-Breed, I think in like the 70s. I would encourage all of you to read all of her works because she's brilliant. And I think that I believe that she has recently published something else. but actually like a really poignant work of hers had an empty red dress on the cover of it. And I read it about 25 times when I was 16 years old. And I didn't even remember that that was the cover of that book until about 7 years into doing the REDress project. And then it like either I saw the book cover somewhere or it just dawned on me like, holy, and that, you know, and so it's wild. But anyway, so there's a connection there. But I'm reading, oh my goodness, I just want to go to my bookshelf now. Okay, let me think. I need to think. I'm reading a book right now by Wilfred Buck. He is an Anishinaabe elder from this area. He's just published his first book, and he's actually like an expert on traditional star knowledge. He's been kind of collecting that knowledge and working with elders who know that knowledge for quite a long time. And he's known as like the star guy around here. And he goes and teaches workshops to students and shares that traditional stories. I could go on. I could take up this whole talk talking about writers. I've also been reading a lot of amazing poets lately. Billy Ray Belcourt is unbelievable, and he's just won a whole bunch of prizes, and he's brilliant. And Tanya Linklater, she is a professor, can't remember where, but she's also put out a book of poetry. Those are, I won't go on. I want to, but I won't.
It sounds like we could have another event around like the books, right?
Yeah, a reader share, like, because like, oh my goodness, it's really exciting what's out there right now too. And I feel like Indigenous voices are being published at like higher rates, at least here in Canada, than they ever have been. So there's just so many more people to hear from.
Agreed. I would say that that's happening here in Minnesota as well, and it's really gratifying.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Another question is, do you want to talk about your return in 2023 and what your gallery exhibition might look like? Do you have any ideas about that?
Oh my goodness, no, it's too far in advance for me. I work on the fly. Honestly, like a lot of my performances, I thought up 10 minutes before I was going to do them. I just feel like I like to respond to the moment. So, so that kind of happens, but no, I'm really excited about it. And I have like 2-3 shows opening like this week. So thinking about ones a year from now is not on my radar just yet.
Exactly. Truth talk from artists.
Yeah,
right?
true words. If it's not happening now, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. So I see a note in the chat that I think is intended to be a question. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it.
Sure.
So it says, very beautiful and impactful installation. It was a hard one. Outdoor space was ideal, gave feeling of spirits, although I was alone. Saw a movie called Wind River years ago. First, I'd heard of this incomprehensible tragedy, thought it was localized, and had no idea that this was happening in multiple nations. Saw a painting in a neighborhood group exhibit of Indigenous artists. The one that spoke to me was a group of birch trees with red dresses among them, based on one of your installations. Then I just happened to see your exhibition in Things to Do this weekend, and I went on Sunday. Is there a resource that you know of that gives ways that we can be involved?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't even know.
I think
in that area because I'm not there.
Yeah. I think maybe a place to start would be we have this integrated learning series website, which has a really nice list of resources of organizations that are support systems here locally, and I think that might be a good place to start. I think Dean Stanley is on tonight, so maybe she can drop the link to the ILS website in there for you, so that I can keep going with the questions. But I liked that person was mentioning about how this kind of keeps popping up.
Yeah, it's sort of beautiful, hey? Because I get messages that people had a dream about the red dresses and they knew they were coming, and like it's
Wow.
just wild. Like it's just like something's been tapped into that everybody was waiting for, and everybody just is moved by it, and it moves people. It's really amazing, and it's far beyond anything I orchestrated. That's for sure. I can tell you that.
I mean, I will share that I've dreamt about them, which is very haunting and beautiful. And then I worry about them. Like I think about, like, if it's really windy out or tonight it's raining, and
yeah, you want to
I want to protect them. I have this like urge to protect them. And I've talked to other folks here who have, similar reactions. And I've noticed too, because they're hung outside and in the weather, sometimes they fall off. But I've noticed, I noticed when I went outside one day last week after it was super windy, that someone had just lovingly draped it over a bench. Like they knew it shouldn't be on the ground. And I was just so moved by that gesture.
It is.
So I do think it inhabits us in ways that we can't really understand until we're in front of it.
Absolutely.
I am sensitive to the time. I don't want to keep you too long. Maybe one more question. What can you recommend for those of us who are babies in facing the reality of Indigenous women, perhaps to help them carry and heal the trauma while maintaining energy to remain present in our daily lives?
I would say like making connections with local communities that are doing work is really important. And also just being willing to, listen and be present and, in those spaces, and to hear those stories, and, not to take up space in those spaces, but just to allow like the community and the people to lead the conversation, and to just, I don't know, help out with what needs helping out with, and to build relationship and create connection. And and I think that it's really important, like the women know what we know what we need. Like, we don't need to be told what we need. And I think very often, Indigenous groups are told what they need to heal, and we know how to heal. We know how to heal better than the general public does, actually. And so it's just like, I think it's just like coming into these circles with humility, and just like offering to wash the floor if it needs washing, or like, pick up that baby that's crying, or whatever needs sort of doing, and just kind of be around and be present and be witness and be support.
That seems like a really beautiful call to action, and a nice way to wrap up our event tonight. Thank you, Jaime, so much for spending this time with us. We really appreciate it. I have been telling students all week how important and it is to hear from artists in their own voices. And so I really appreciate you making the time for us. And I just want to also thank our terrific audience, and for all of these really thoughtful questions. It's just been such a nice hour to spend with all of you. So thank you very much.
Yes, thanks so much, Nicole. That was a fun conversation.
Absolutely. Everyone have a wonderful evening, and please join us for the closing ceremony for REDress on Sunday afternoon at 2. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.